Não, é triste, cara. Daí quando o cara morre, ela fica chorando. Eu que eles se encontravam e depois não aconteceu.
Ai. Tipo, o cara volta pra cidade e depois você ele era e daí ele foi no bar e o coração dele vai pro filho.
Aonde é que você manda filho? E aonde é pra pegar?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us once again this morning for a session on databases. And I'm very sorry to have dragged you back from yesterday's wonderful experience on the beach with the dancing and amazing food. So thank you once again, Simone, Hannah, and everyone who was involved in organising that. Thank you very much. This morning's session is a little bit different to what you have in your books. I'm actually going to start with me. And then we're going to have Beppy give his talk. And then I'm going to pass you over to my co-chair, which is Marcus Dominguez. And then we're going to break for coffee, because Marcus said it's really important that we have a wee break, have some coffee, make sure we're not too hungry. And then we're going to come back, and then it will be our pleasure to invite Fabiana to give a talk for us. And then we'll have a little bit of a round-table discussion about perhaps some of the things we've heard, and then perhaps talk about perhaps what we want in the future as regarding perhaps databases and some other services that we perhaps want as a researching monogenic community. So once again, on behalf of Marcus Dominguez and myself, thank you again for joining this session. And if I may be permitted, I'll start my talk. Okay. So, thank you very much. Okay, for most of us, when we start using monogenic keys, most of us begin our search with Yamaguchi's Systema Helminthum. And perhaps, while we're very familiar with the book, perhaps we're not so familiar with the actual gentleman behind all this great work. So here we have Satu Yamaguchi, 1894 to 1976. And what I'd like to do as part of this presentation today is to have a look at all, perhaps some of the monogenic research leading up to the publication of the Systema Helminthum, and then look at the next 50 years on to where we are today. So just delving into Yamaguchi's great work, published in 1963. And if you actually look at some of his original manuscripts, if you're lucky enough to go to the Meguru Museum in Japan, this shows, for example, some of his original notes. Kazuo Agawa very kindly sent me this. It just happens to be on Gyrodactylus. It took Yamaguchi over 7 years to compile this particular work. And behind this, also you can see all his original drawings, many of which were made by his students and also by his wife. So just focusing on a couple of these drawings here. For those of you that can't read his original text, this is what he's written at the bottom of the page here. He's describing a couple of new genera, or revising a couple of genera. And these are the final drawings that appear in his work. So, just to give a summary of what Yamaguchi achieved leading up to the publication of his work in 1963, so we've just stopped the graph here. We currently recognize 269 genera. So this BY means before Yamaguchi's Systema Helminthum. And within this, we can also see he published around 1,557 species which we currently recognize today. Okay, so what I would like to do is just give you a quick history. We've already heard some of this from some of the presentations that we've heard already. So I just want to start right at the beginning and just take you through perhaps some of the most notable monogenians that we've seen along the way. I should point out this is actually quite a simple presentation, so please bear with me. So just starting in the late 1700s, the first monoepiscopalian that we see described is entered del Hippocrossi in 1776. And for those of you that are perhaps not familiar with your history, then the American War of Independence was going on at this time. 13 American states decided to break away from the UK and strike out for independence. About the same time, we also saw the first submarine attack, if you like, by the Americans. The submarine was called the Turtle, and its first attack was on the HMS Eagle in New York Harbor, and they tried to blow up a British ship. A few years later, we see the appearance of our first polyepiscopalian, Mesochorius alosi. And at this time, in 1782, we see the Montgolfier brothers deciding to take their first test flight in their balloon. We also saw George Washington beginning to order a Purple Heart for soldiers in the War of Independence. We saw the death of the great composer Bach. And in Switzerland, we even saw the last witch being, if you like, executed. So just to point out what's really going on elsewhere in the world. You have all this madness, and yet there is sanity and clarity amongst the scientific community describing some monogenians. A few years later, we then see the appearance of our first polystoma. So these are the first three species that we see described. About this time, when the first polystoma was described, the French Revolution was kicking off. This young gentleman in the very sensible trousers here is Napoleon. And for those of you that are also familiar with Napoleon, you also know perhaps this painting on his very famous horse. This is actually Bucephalus. Of course, I'm now committing the cardinal sin about talking about a digenian in a monogenian community in a conference, so I apologise for talking about digenians very briefly. Okay, let's look forward now, starting with the 1800s. So, unfortunately, Napoleon. We see the appearance or the description of the largest monogenian that we know. It's on our trophy. 1814 to 1815, Napoleon is defeated, he's exiled, he returns, causes a bit more mischief, is defeated and finally exiled once again.
A British center for people every year.
I can't stand the Brits and the French.
We see the second voyage of the HMS Beagle with Charles Darwin on board. We see the description of perhaps the most romantic parasite, here with Diplozoa paradoxum. And then later in 1832, we also see the description of the genera Gyrodactylus and Dactylogyrus. So we have the most romantic parasite here, and at this particular point, I must ask, is everyone in the audience here over 18? Because at this particular point, I would just like to talk about the secret sex life of the jungle. Now, Jaco has already very nicely introduced this subject on the first day, but very quickly talking about Gyrodactylus, they have an amazing potential for reproduction. You have a parent worm here, if you like, and inside you have the next stages. It's viviparous, and when it gives birth to something almost the same size as the parent worm. It's like going to bed and then waking up next morning with something the same size lying next to you in bed. Perhaps that's happened before, I don't know. We know they're polyembryous. We have multiple stages inside each other. They're progenetic, which basically means that they achieve, if you like, sexual maturity while still having these larval characters. They can alternate between sexual and asexual cycles. And then they have this very crazy system where their first birth is actually their sister and not their daughter. It's subsequent birth after that first birth event that's then their daughter. So they have this crazy system going on there. If that's not weird enough, are they female? or they lack a vagina. And after giving birth, they then develop, if you like, a male copulatory organ. They don't need sex, but can be very promiscuous at times when there's enough of them around. And their union is not beautiful. This is their, if you like, their male copulatory organ, and basically the transfer of sperm can be anywhere over the body, so it's not a beautiful thing. So, not really a romantic parasite. So, 1832, weird sex monogenian Gyrodactylus was described alongside the more sane aspects of the gyrus. Charles Darwin is still on board, legal, he's still doing his thing. In 1834, we see Charles Babbage invents the precursor of the computer. A few minutes later, he gets the first spam mail. In 1879, thankfully, Thomas Edison invites electric light, which then allows us to describe Spinura ulcerae, which is the first monogenian to be described from North America. In 1889, Benedenia Pendelorthii is the first monogenian to be described from South America. We heard this in Anna Cohen's talk just on Tuesday. And this was described from Chile. And then in 1889, we see the description of perhaps the monogenian recorded from the deepest waters. We see this protocotyle described. And here I've stolen some of Jean-Lou's amazing photographs. And here we have protocotyle Dresus, which has been described from the blunt-nosed six-gilled shark. It's bathy demersal, and it's been recorded at depths of up to 2,500 meters. Jean-Loup just very recently just described another species. I think it was from slightly shallow waters. Is that correct, Jean-Loup? No? Same sort of depth. So perhaps you have a new record. Then, in 1894, we see the birth of Yamaguchi. And then in 1894, we see the first monogenian, Brazilian monogenian described. Perhaps that's worth here, 1894. Moving into the 1900s, 1903, we see the Wright brothers make their first powered flight. We have the description of the first monogenian from an invertebrate in 1912, its ancestral. Then in 1912, we have the slightly contested first description of the first Australian monogenian. Discussing this with Marty. In Yamaguchi's book, he suggests it's an Opercotyl, I believe, but the data on this is still under some sort of contention, but at the moment, this is perhaps the earliest monogenian to be described, the first monogenian to be described from Australia. Then in 1913, we see polystoma, this then redescribed as paripolystoma, redescribed as Rochampier, then redescribed as eupolystoma, and this is Africa's first monogenian in 1913. Around 1913, we see one of the first conferences and a collection of a good group of lads here. This is one of the first parasitology get-togethers. Perhaps you can pick out a few faces, a few names there, a few familiar faces. And then in 1924, we see the description of ocular tremor hippopotami. This is the first monogenian to be described from an aquatic mammal, and I know that Louis is looking for more. I understand, Louis, that you said it's a very brave man. After culling the hippo, then goes and lifts up the eyelid to see if they have ocular tremor. 1931, we see the description of the first monogenian from Antarctic waters. Moving forward once again, by 1937, we're now beginning to describe new species at quite an accelerated rate. We now have our 500th monogenian described. 1938, Axine Anada is perhaps the shortest binomial name. I think you're going to see where I'm going to be going with this sort of line of comments. 1955, we see the 1000th monogenian to be described. 1958, very important, we see Brazil win the World Cup. 1962, we see Brazil win the World Cup again. 1963, we then see the publication of Yamaguchi's great work. At the age of 69, as I said, it took him 7 years to produce. It contains 269 genera, 1,557 species that are currently recognized as being valid. And at this point, really, we should start beginning our talk, which was perhaps 50 years ago. But what's the current state of things today? specifically, how many monogenian genera are there? How many species do we have? And can we start thinking about pulling all this information together to start creating a central resource for the entire monogenic community to use? So perhaps we can start thinking about a system at Helmintham or a Yamaguchi too, and I think this is something that we can all be involved with. So after this talk, Betty's going to be talking about MonoDB and posing just a few of these particular questions. So what I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 months, I've been looking at some of the key websites. So for example, the Natural History Museum website, which stopped in 2004, which was a great source of information. But we've now seen the emergence of some new online databases. So we've tried to collect all of the information from these web resources. And then we've been working through a series of key texts. So for example, not only Yamaguchi, but Nero's work, Chinese work, and also work from the Russians. We then, if you like, read a large number of papers and done over 3,000 searches, for example, on some of these online databases, like for example Web of Science. And we've now produced a complete list of genera, and within that we've now produced a complete list of species. Don't worry, we're not going to go through them all. This is just to show that the actual database does exist. So the current state of play, if we now look forward, 269 genera by the time Yamaguchi published his work. We now have a further 467 genera that have been described and recognized in the last 50 years. So 738 genera, except Lunin introduced another genera on Monday, so perhaps we should now think of this as 739. We now have, if you follow this projected description of new genera, then by about 2025 we should have over 800 genera described, if we continue at the same rate. Number of species that we now have, 5,661, except from this particular conference we've heard that there's a whole load more new species being described, so again we need to revise this. And of course, thanks to Simone, Marcia and Anna, we now have another fantastic gift and a fantastic resource, and of course, thanks guys, but I now need to add all those species in, cross-check all those as well with our list together. They describe 651 species in that particular book, which is around 12.5% of all the monogenian species that we know. So just looking over, for example, the rate of description of genera, and then here we're just taking the average over a sort of 25-year blocks, and you can see that between 1950 to 1999, we had quite a large peak of activity, 300 and 200 genera being described, but just more recently, this is just beginning to tail off a little bit, it's just beginning to drop a little bit. And it's the same with the number of species, and the average number of species being described per year. You can see, again, we had a big peak of activity in the 1950 to 1999 period, with over 80 species per year being described. That's just tailed off, just very slightly, just recently. However, having heard all the presentations at this particular conference, I'm sure that this is going to rise once again. So, just looking at the monogenian genera, Gyrodactylus and Dactylogyrus account for around 25% of all the species that we know. And then the remaining, if you like, 23 genera account for the other 50% of species that we currently know. Except we've heard, again, the description of many, many new species during this particular conference. The interesting thing, though, is that since Yamaguchi's publication, we've seen the description of the Anacanthorus emerging out of South America, with lots of new species being described, and also Annulotrema from Africa as well, with over 40 species being described. So just looking at Dactylogyrus, again, you can see that over the period of 1950 to 1974, we have over 374 species being described. Most of this work was through that of Alex Kusev, and you can see that the Russians described nearly 50% of all those Dactylogyrus species, and Kusev himself was responsible for the description of around 117 of those. Later on, we see a switch of power, and we then see around 180 species being described by the Chinese. Again, with Zhang describing around 60% of those. Gusset, of course, is still very active and describes another 46 species. But you can just see just recently that's beginning to tail off a little bit. When we actually look at the curve, again the number of Dactylgyra species that we're describing each year has tailed off quite dramatically in fairly recent years. Gyrodactylus, again, is a very, very similar period. A very similar picture, I should say. The early period, we can see major contributions from the Czechs, the Swedes, the Russians and the Americans. But it's later on, in this 1975 to 1999 period, you can see a major input from Ergens for the description of species. Again, as we look at the curve, you can see that this is a bit more promising. You can see that the number of species is actually beginning to rise again. And this is purely because if we look at this last 5 years here, you can see that over 50% of the species being described are coming out of Africa. And then again, in this conference, we've also heard more species that are awaiting description publication from Ephraim and Martin and from many others. So there's perhaps another 20 species to be described. So probably by the end of the year, we'll have over 500 species of Gyrodactylus. And of course, we're also exploring lots of new environments. So for example, we're now looking, for example, environments which are pretty harsh. So for example, places like Pitch Lake in Trinidad, where we just described a new genus of Gyrodactylid from there. We've also seen the description of monogenes from, for example, hypersaline pools. We're exploring lots of new environments. These are just two very small examples. Of course, this doesn't compare to the amazing contribution that we've seen from New Caledonia, from Brazil, from Africa, from China. Lots and lots of interesting species emerging there. So, just moving on from publication of Yamaguti's work, current status is 1964. We see the description of Gyrodactylus pharyngus from the Bering Sea. This is perhaps the most northerly monogenian that's been described. Unfortunately, in 1968, Afrogyrodactylus is perhaps, for me, the most disappointing monogenian being described, because I see no evidence of an afro, unfortunately, on England. 1970, Brazil with the World Cup again. 1995, we see the longest genus of monogenian described. 2002, you guessed it once again, Brazil win the World Cup yet again. And then in 2007, for me, this is my favourite parasite, Paleotricha banana. It's only when you start looking at the specimens you can see, yeah, these guys are right, it really does look like a banana. And then in 2007, we have the most logical, systematic, sequential naming of species. Jean-Louis, this is your accolade once again. Pseudorhabsicus wheaty. 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 I'm sure the pronunciation is terrible. And then in 2010, we see Gyrosiluriensis phasmaquadiensis, which is the longest binomial monogenian name. So, for those of you that are looking for new challenges, this is something for you to consider. I haven't found the monogenian from the highest altitude yet. I thought there might be one at Lake Titicaca. Perhaps some of you can look for new monogenian records to announce. So, just in summary, I realise I have gone on. Yamaguchi, when he published 269 genera, 1,557 species. At 50 years on, we now have 739 genera. We have 5,661 species. We're currently preparing this for publication. This is Yamaguti's publication date. You can see by 1977, we've already published 3,000 species, 4,000 by 1988, 5,000 by 2003. And Kritsky, in the Kritsky domain, if you're watching, thank you very much for your contribution, because you've either described or re-described, amended 468 species, which is around 8.3% of all the monogenian species that we know. If we continue this line a little further, then I'd like to suggest that perhaps by 2019, we might have 6,000 monogenians. Well, that's September. Probably on the 22nd. About 20 to 10 times. And my final summary point is that Brazil really are quite good at football. So with that, I'd just like to thank the organising committee for inviting me here and for their amazing conference that they put together. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Which one is number 10?
I have one question. Why do you think Ronaldo's
I'm quite embarrassed to ask, but is there any question?
You mentioned that in Yamaguchi there are 269 generals, and you said...
You said 269 generals that we currently consider valid. Do you mean that he described many more things that we don't consider valid anymore?
Since that vote, some of those have been contested, some of those have been revised, and the current state of play is that 269 are in our current accepted list. Of course, as we put this list together, we then want to circulate it around the community, because I'm sure there are going to be more areas, there's going to be further amendments, additions, omissions, so there's an opportunity for us all, if you like, to try and contribute to try and get that list as accurate as we possibly can. Of course, as science and research continues, there are going to be further amendments. If there are no further questions, perhaps I can then move to our next speaker, which is Beppe. Giuseppe Baldini, and I think Beppe has the shortest title in the advert, which is just entitled Genes.
Hello. Yes, Walter asked me to keep it short, the title, so I was thinking about databases, but then he said shorter. It's clear. Okay, so I would like to introduce myself. This was 2 years and 13 years ago. I just finished my PhD in veterinary aquaculture and aquatic parasitology with Rani Shin. I'm Italian, 33 years old, looking for a job just in case. So today I'm going to talk to you about databases, and last night Andy and myself we were trying to understand the total list of the homogeneous species described, which is so far 5,661. But who are the top 3 authors? So one we discovered, thanks Andy for spoiling it. So at third place is Professor Jose with 224 species, which represented 4% of the total homogeneous species described. Then the second place Yamaguchi with 290, and of course the first place is Professor Delimplisky with 468 species. Now, just a few species out of the podium, we have Walter with 220 species, so sorry you're not on the podium. But this morning we actually used another algorithm, and we realized that the total number of your species described is not 220, but 238. So, you take over Professor Rose. I'm sure you're happy with that. Okay, when you talk about databases, you usually think about a long list of boring numbers, names, and this is the reaction that you usually get. But hold on, we didn't want that. We wanted to create a central resource that could be used by scientists of all ages, and that could be easily accessible for the benefit of all. So a bunch of us got together, we thought, wow, that's good idea, and I said, yeah, let's develop it. So, I have to admit we didn't have any money when we started this crazy thing. We did this in our spare time, and it's still a work in progress, so be patient please. So I'm going to introduce to you this database of homogeneous, which is called MonDB, but I'm going to introduce you in a different way.
this summer.
That's clear, he's struck again. With the same modus operandi. I saw it jumping out of the water and then disappearing.
No one is safe.
It's not supposed to be an equal laugh. You've got to be kidding me.
Be ready. Know the enemy.
I'm on the murder. We must do something. Maybe it's time we call the brothers.
2 men. The only hope. The brothers.
Who's responsible for this mess? We just don't know, Killer. It's impossible to find out. There's too many parasites.
Nothing is impossible with a good database.
Look at it. It's neurotransgenesis. Plasmapodiensis. What the fruit is that? You cannot be serious.
From the director of the Da Vinci Code and my big fat Greek cooker, Leonardo DiCaprio, Catfish, Sergeant Jones, Likely in Mono DB.
Thank you. So I'll continue with going to navigate into the website. So I want to say that it's completely open access, so any help is very welcome. And let's navigate into the website. If you click on the left-hand side of What's My World, you get on the homepage where you can find the hookers, which are the parasite with hooks, and the clampers, parasite with clamps, or none of them. But in this case, Udonella is included in the hookers because it's a monopistocotyledon. So if you click on the link, you can get a list of monopistocotyledons, which is a quick overview of the main families, and it's intended to be used like a dichotomous key. So then, if you click on one of the images, you get, you can click on the families to jump onto the list of family, or you can either go on the home page and click on the left-hand side of family. So here you have the full list of the families, and on the bottom you have the full list of the invalid families. So if you go, for example, on one of them, let's say the well-known Polystomatidae, you can find that you have a main reference to the family, and then 2 links, one with the overview of the family Polystomatidae, that if you click on that, you have a brief description with clickable general images, and a list of genera of the family Polystomatidae. So you can either click on the image or going through the links. If you click on the list of genera, you have, of course, all the genus informations, the family, the authority, and the validity. Hopefully you get it right. Then, if you click on genus, you have the full list of 739 valid genera so far on monogeneans with their respective families. Now, let's go, for example, to Geolactus, which is my favorite one. I'm going to switch to another website that we constructed a few years ago, which is called GeroDB. Just to give you an example, so I'm going to transfer across MongoDB using GeroDB just as an example, so to show you what we did. You know, GeroDB is on gerodb.net, and you have on the home page links to videos for people who know little about genus. I don't know if you can quickly click on this one. Yes. Okay. So then you have here the list of world gyros, and with 476 species before this conference. If you click on one of them, for example, Pterodactylus headquarters, you have the authored description where possible, of course, with identification, taxonomic history, and in some cases also the distribution of that parasite in the country where it's been found. For example, if you click on the link, you have the map, in this case in UK. Talking about maps, there is a new tool for GeoDB which we want to use also on MongoDB. That basically allows you to type in the name of the species and will connect straight to a sort of Google Maps with all the information that you need. We also provide line drawings, light micrographs, and where possible, of course, scanning electron micrographs of the species. So then you have the list of the host for that particular species, and all the links, all the host names are linkable. So you can click on that and we'll go straight to the database fish base. This is very important. I want to point out that identifying correctly the fish, the host species, is as important as identifying the parasite species, because most of the time you have records on fish that are not correct. Then you have several tools, for example biosystematics, and you have molecular biosystematics tools like marker figures, PCR protocols, links to NCBI, or also other protocols for morphologists, for example. So you have specimen preparation protocols or point-to-point measurement. Okay, now the things that I showed you on GeoDB, they are all in these three links, so on species, worked by host, and host species. We also try to provide extra resources like images, videos. For example, for the images, it's intended that people would donate their own images, they don't publish, of course. And we will put the authority on the images. And this would help the Monogenian community to have, an extra library, photo library. So what we want to do, there's still a lot to do, but these are the things that hopefully will come soon. Search by host family tools. We have already a search by host species, but we want to do a host family tools. And then search by country. Try to complete all the details on families, genera, and hopefully species. And create an online reference library for everybody, for free. Now there is not a problem, but it's a bit tricky here. The museum curators are open and understandable, concerned with the long valuable species. So the solution is to create an electronic type or e-type if you want. So instead of the slides, well, also in addition to the slides, you can have a library of images of the holotypes and paratypes that you deposit. This would avoid long waiting time, potential handling damage, and of course mail losses, which is the most concern. What's next? As always, we are searching for supporting funds to try to expand the populate MongoDB, and then we need you, which means experts to provide material, info, images for uploading and populating the website. Now, this, you might heard during this conference, we need this, we need this other one, we want you. So the first day we heard we need more hands, and then we need more people looking for parasites. This is true, but the truth is that there is a problem, and the responsible for this problem, which means that the taxonomist number is decreasing, is the impact factor of the journal. So I'm not going to say anything now, maybe we can discuss later during the roundtable discussion. But this is, in my opinion, the big problem. Thanks.
Do we have any questions for Beppe?
I just have a comment, Beppe. I think this is not a problem really, it's a problem that we created as taxonomists. We are the one that created a code that says that you don't have to make any reference to the description. So we don't cite ourselves. And the ecologists, they don't even think about citing the author of species name. I was playing the other day and a friend of mine described one species, a small species of cricket. And he has like one citation. He has more than 1,000 citations in different papers. So that's something that we have to reverse. And if you know anybody on the commission of the zoological nomenclature, this is the moment of doing that. I know one guy and I've been bugging him.
So you're suggesting as we put the authority down for each parasite, we should also include that as a reference in our reference?
Absolutely. Because we taught everyone how to do that, and now we're paying the price.
I agree with you. In fact, the problem is connected to the fundings because, of course, institutional fundings are related to the quality of the papers, but the quality of the papers is not the actual quality, but the actual journal impact factor, which is not the quality, because I can publish a crap paper in Nature, and then I can...
See, I don't agree with that either, because this quality is very relative, but we are playing the game. You know, there's a game going on, and we could be losing. We could be winning, but we're losing because of us, because of ourselves.
To comment on what Walter said, what you said about the impact factor, isn't that less a problem of the ISM7 than of the journals? Because it's not the ISM7 that is going to decide whether species photos have to be cited or not, it's the journal that has to put policy. And some journals, like I know that this new free open access journal, the European Journal of Taxonomy, they demand appropriate citation of taxonomy, which causes sometimes a bit of a stir because I try to do it nowadays. Sometimes I get the referee comment that I sign too many things for a small paper. Anyway, just ignore that. But I was wondering, what does the ISM7 actually have to do with this?
No, but the problem is not the journal, because the journal, the editors are in our same situation. They can't control this, so they are asked to increase the impact factor to have a better evidence through the community. So it's not their fault, but something has to change, because really impact factor is not a measure, something to measure.
Right, if they advise authors to cite papers. The editors of taxonomic journals can make the impact factors rise more or less mutually if they advise the authors to cite taxonomic.
Yes, it's a solution. It's not a solution to the problem. It's how to change the problem. The problem is still there. The impact factor.
Maybe that's something we should all agree on. If we get papers with that sort of situation where the authorities have been implemented in references, perhaps we should just accept it as referees and encourage it. Yeah.
Well, I agree with the thing about citing and so. I had another question that's completely unrelated. While we were speaking, thanks to the power of the internet and of my iPhone, I was looking at GyroDB, and the first thing I see in the first page, last line, is copyright GyroDB. And if I heard well, I heard it's open access. So the first thing you have to do if you want to convince people to participate is to change the license, not copyright GyroDB, but Creative Commons, preferably Creative Commons 3.0, so that everybody can copy it, use it freely. As it is now, it's a bit discouraging.
I agree with you, and it's not updated the website.
Yeah, it's written copyright 2007.
Yeah.
I believe it's not updated.
The JRDB is supposed to be substituted by MongoDB, because MongoDB is going to include hopefully everything, or it's going to include all the links to several databases.
Okay. I'm sure we agree. It's just a copy.
Any further questions for Beppe? If not, then can I thank Beppe once again? Marcus Dominguez up to the dais. And Marcus is going to be telling us about monotaxonomy, time for integration. Okay, Marcus, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Bev, to remind me that once I got long hair. Well, my talk is about monogenetic taxonomy. And this talk I will focus on problems that we're facing nowadays. Some of them you already know based on Dr. Hendrick's presentation on the first day and the second day of this was. And in this presentation, we need to try to understand how can we establish the operation based on possible quantum actions. I remember when I saw this presentation, so things were so excited. If I remember, I saw this in Dr. Delaney's laboratory in Idaho. Then I realized that yes, time is one of the problems for taxonomy and taxonomy in the 21st century. The problem has some names. One of these is the biodiversity crisis. We know that time is running out to describe and document life on Earth. For example, habitat destruction and operation continue at pace, and the world's population is growing at a rate that should frighten even the most competent taxonomists. The problem is worse in mega-diverse countries, for example, Brazil. Brazil has the highest species richness of freshwater fish and mammal in the world, has the second highest diversity of amphibians, the third of birds, and the 15th number of reptiles. Brazil accounts almost 7% of total species described, but we expect a higher number of species to be described if we have time. In the neotropicals, there are more than 6,000 species of freshwater fish, according to Malabar and Rosa, with more than 2,500 species occurring in Brazilian waters. Besides the fact that we know about not 4,000 species, but after Anne's presentation, more than 5,000 species of molluscs around the world, only 434 species of molluscs are described from Brazil. And the most of this diversity is found in freshwater hosts. According to Baker and Diana, estimates of species suggest that fewer than 3% of freshwater fish molluscs are known in Brazilian continental waters. An example about how can we impact the environment and how we can impact the diversity is the Belmont hydroelectric dam in the Chico River. This hydroelectric dam will be the third largest in the world, and many others are planned to be built in this river. The biggest problem with this dam is that the rich flooded forests of the Big Bend and the Lower Xingu would no longer receive the required seasonal floodwater, almost drying the Big Bend, this part here, this Big Bend and the Lower Xingu, almost drying this part along this 100 kilometers stretch. It will seriously impact the diversity of fish and, of course, their parasites. There are 700 species occurring in this river. From them, we know that at least 27 species are endemic to the Big Bend. For example, siluriforms, cyclids, and characiforms. What we know about molluscs from Lower Xingu and the Big Bend, no species was described, except I think there is a one poster that we'll present today, talking about some species from this river. We are facing another problem. the taxonomic impediment, the declining number of taxonomies on a global scale. There has been much discussion on the taxonomic impediment and speeding up descriptive taxonomy. It's claimed that the slow rate of taxonomy species description is being impeded, for example, the lack of cyber infrastructure resource, the inadequacy of funding for taxonomy, education, and research. And after knowing about that, I remember that famous quotation that I presented the second slide. So many species, so little time. However, I bring another quotation. So many species, so few specimens. In my not so long experience with taxonomy, every year I notice that the number of undergraduate students interested in taxonomy is getting fewer and fewer. I talk with a lot of people these days from different countries, and everyone told me about that. We are facing this low number of taxonomies. I would like to use Brazil as reference just to see what's going on with the acknowledgement of monogenetic diversity. Until the 1970s of the last century, very few species of monogeneity were known from freshwater hosts in Brazil. However, the collaboration between Dr. Vernon Thatcher, especially when he was working in the Amazon at IMPA in Manaus, and the land critics from USA in the 80s with Walter Baker, represented the starting point of the most intense and constant efforts towards understanding of the diversity of monogenetes from continental waters in Brazil. Also, an account from Instituto Oswaldo Cruz made a huge contribution to understand the diversity of marine monogenite and freshwater too. Other research has been contributing to a better understanding of the diversity of monogenite from Brazil. And here in this room we have a lot of these people here. These researchers and their students are working to try to understand our diversity. But how many monogenite specialists are in Brazil? A survey of the number of these taxonomies working on diversity of monogeneites was done. To do that, I used the Plataforma Labs, which is a huge CV database for our researchers in Brazil. The search was performed using the following parameters. To have a PhD, at least one taxonomic paper in the last 2 years as first author or senior author. I know one paper each 2 years don't make you a taxonomist. Why I use this just to have this information. Based on this search, I found 26 reports. 17 research with employment in some university and researchers, or as researcher center. What's interesting is to analyze the distribution of these researchers. The geographical distribution of taxonomies is uneven, mostly concentrated in south and southeast of Brazil. You can see that we have 5 researchers working in South Brazil, 10 researchers in Southeast of Brazil, 1 researcher in the Midwest region, and 1 in the North region of Brazil. One important information that we can see in this map is the most taxonomists live far from diverse region in Brazil. For example, Amazon. Look, I'm here alone. And talking about integration, I will take a part of my presentation. I would like to invite students, researchers to visit my lab at Universidade Federal do Pará. Besides being a beautiful region with distinct environments, mangrove, marine, estuary, freshwater, much remains to be done in the region. You are more than welcome to visit us. And please, I know that funding can be a problem, but distance not. We we already received a visit from one of our friends, Dr. Ian Winterton. He went there and spent 1 month at my lab. Okay, back into the presentation. It's clear that the world policies must be planned, but this will be more effective if countries know exactly how they can deal and can contribute to the global understanding of the biodiversity. In Brazil, government reacted biodiversity and taxonomy crisis by launching some programs like Reflora, PPBio, Cisbiota, and Protax. This program, Protax, is a training program in taxonomy which aims to stimulate and formation of highly qualified human research in taxonomy and curation. The other example that I have is the Reflora program, and Fabiana will talk about this, about the database that they prepared for Brazilian flora. Other important international programs was launched by U.S. National Science Foundation, the Planetary Biodiversity Inventories. Two good examples of this NSF-funded project is the Global Cestodes, a collaborative effort among the cestode experts from 21 countries around the world. Another example is the Alcat fish species inventory. The principal goal of this project is to complete the taxonomy of siluriformes. The main point of both programs is the recognition of new species in a short period of time. Unfortunately, we don't work with charismatic animals, for example, pandas, and it will be very hard to make a positive campaign about molecular. But what we can do about that? We can propose at least some directions, or think about that, or which problem we need to take a look first. For example, funding. Funding is a problem, we know that. Taxonomists have pointed out that most of the limited annual funding goes to support molecular phylogeny greater than integrative data sets, revisions, monographies, or improved classifications and names. And at this point, I think we need to have an individual commitment to common goals. Taxonomists need to stop thinking about my group or my project and then to think about our revision or our project. Common goals do not mean that we have to say that do exactly the same thing. Diversity is, after all, at the core of our science. We need to have a big plan. We need to have a big project. We need to integrate this work. Another thing that we can do is a proposal of protocol for description. Setting standards is always difficult when people work together in groups. We know that sometimes taxonomic descriptions are as variable as taxonomies. And when all are to be collated into a single word, consistent is necessary. But at least we can propose some protocols. For example, measurement protocols, where I already have some of these protocols available to your database. Species descriptions in large papers can be more efficiently produced using, for example, a program like Delta. We can use this. We can use this to have the most important point for using such technology is to promote consistency in descriptive taxonomy and taxonomic terminology. And I think the most important point that we can try to do here is to propose just one integrated cyber infrastructure resource. We need, for example, to have this. And this infrastructure may provide a large amount of information that otherwise would not be available to most researchers, and in many cases is directly responsible for the increase in complete species descriptions and revisions. For example, we need to have all bibliography of all papers on systematic of monogenites available. Electronic copies of old and difficult to obtain articles, digital image of museum, high museum. This is important. I think we need to have this. Well, Dr. Lenny Bruce told us, I think at the first presentation, we need to think globally and act locally. And this is the way that I try to contribute with this subject. This is a part of my work. This is my experience with integration. This work about elmine parasites of Photonotrigonid. This is a freshwater stingrays that occurs here in South America. In collaboration with two researchers from USP, Universidade de São Paulo, we evaluate the diversity of parasites of freshwater stingrays of this family. Before starting working on this project, only 2 species of monogenoides were known on this host in just one locality. After 3 years sampling in Brazil and some parts of South America, we were able to recognize several new species of monogenoides. From 2 species, now we know 14 species. And besides that, we prepared a database for this work. We have all information related to the host, tissue samples, parasites, everything related with this project. Photographs. It was a nice job that we did with this work. Another work that I did, it was based on my PhD thesis, was a diplectin database. I know that it was very nice for me. I'm very happy about this database because I did this in my PhD, or my PhD dissertation, when I prepared the Excel work. I looked at the end and said, well, I need to share this with people. And when we are doing PhD, we have plenty of time to learn about programming. And I try to learn about how to do that things. I know that's not so beautiful and maybe needs more refinement, but I'm very glad about this. And the other database that I prepared, it was another postdoc that I made in Adelaide with Dr. Ian Whittington and Lad Shilson, is the Exabotry database. It was very good to do this because I connect this with Fishbase. I try to connect this with organism name database. I proposed, but I didn't. I wasn't able to do that, to put PDFs from all papers. It was very nice to do that. I'm very happy about this work. But this is solid work. And I would tell you that it was nice, but I don't want to do this alone. I think it's important, this is the time that we have just one database, to have all this information. We need to understand how we can put gyrobase, monobase, Exabot database, diplectin database, just in one database. This is, I think, is important. Well, although this scenario is a little bit frightening, I am an optimist. And I believe that we can move forward in the taxonomy of molecular using the right tools and working in groups. So optimistic that I brought my 2-year-old son to see if someday, I hope someday, he can help me or help the community to work with this group. At least work with the host like his mother. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, for a wonderful presentation. Do we have any questions for Marcus or perhaps even Hikaro, your son?
Thank you, Marcus. I see, as you have seen, two big problems. One big problem is money, okay? Second important problem is people. You told us I don't want to do it alone, okay? I see a third problem, which is the problem of putting all these PDFs available to the community, because 99% of the Mondogenian literature has been published in journals with copyright. Last time I checked, just for fun, in Biodiversity Heritage Library, there was a single paper by Kritzky available. He has written, 200 papers. One paper is available as public domain, only one, and it's a big problem. The CESTOT database that you mentioned includes hundreds of drawings of cestodes, and everybody knows it is illegal, but it works. And that's a decision we have to take at what time. Perhaps a legal possibility for this would be to have the site maybe in Russia or China or something. People can work everywhere in the world, but the site is in Russia. And in Russia, as you know, copyright are not a strong legal issue.
Not in China, Jean-Luc.
No?
Can't have it behind the Great Firewall.
You get it. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you too. And I hope in the next years we can change this. For example, I saw, I think 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure it was Journal of Methodological Society of Washington. They put this in the internet, the old, I think, 1986, 1989 papers, it's all papers, I think.
It is not because it is in the internet that you can freely use it. Of course not. International Journal of Parasitology is in the internet. You cannot use it.
Oh, I see. But we need to think about that.
As far as I know, the copyright is 50 years for drawings.
Depends on countries.
Yeah, 60 years in Australia.
70 years after the death of the author.
Some of them don't die.
For life author,
Just a question. I mean, how ResearchGate works? Because I know, for example, if the author can put the PDFs on his homepage.
No, they cannot. ResearchGate is That is very interesting. Every one of us has put papers on ResearchGate. I have put, I think, 100 of my papers on ResearchGate. This is completely illegal, and we all know it. But we still do it. But every time you put a paper on ResearchGate, you have a small, line behind. See conditions. On the conditions, it's you can upload a PDF only if it is Creative Commons or if it is allowed by the publisher. It is not permitted by the publisher, but we still do it. But if there is a big sue, sometimes it will be between ResearchGate and the publishers, not our problem. But if we make a monogeneous database, if somebody is sued by the publisher, it will be Andy, and we don't want that.
Because I know by law that you can upload your PDFs in your home page. Now forget about ResearchGate. Your home page, you can upload your PDFs and you are protected by law because it's your copyright together with the journal.
I have to remove.
No, I read that.
I already had to remove papers from my homepage.
Yeah.
Asked by the editor. But with that, nothing is, I mean, if we have a network, it's just a matter of asking, I need this paper. If somebody has, it's person to person.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Maybe we just have a brush or something, yeah.
I see. One solution is we are now going for this database. Just do a duplicate drawing, change a little bit and publish it. Right? It's what the photographers and other people do. They have several copies of the same old, and one is copyrighted there and one is copyrighted there. But they have, because they make it by camera, they have so many copies they ever need. No, I don't think
It works really well. I can send everybody a droplet for Adobe Photoshop that bends everything one way by about 2 degrees and then bends it back again, which is enough of a change.
The other way is to load up your pre-publication proof. Do you have any last questions for Marcus? If not, then can I thank both Marcus and Beppe once again for their talks. If I could now ask a break for coffee, if we could return at 11:45. Thank you very much.
I can of course exchange this. Oh, of course not.
Aos 56 anos, quanto mais velho, pior. Mas isso aí é tipo... Sabe aquela coisa que... Se eu pensar, eu não te digo, mas...
Eu também. As pessoas confundem as pode passar.